and you've got children that can't go out on the soccer fields because part of their park is being taken over by tent cities. You've got winter coming around the corner. You have people at the Roosevelt Hotel who are out in the front of the streets, and now they've got little tags. I was down there with their QR code to go in and out of the hotel, and you've got children inside this mass hotel in the middle of the city who are with men that haven't even been properly vetted. And it's like, where do you put all the people? Oh boy. Would you want your children being taught in an overcrowded, underfunded classroom? Is that what you want? Do you want your kids to be left behind, or those that are struggling to keep up, not being taught appropriately because, of course, your classroom is over capacity and you as a teacher are trying to catch other children up? That's what's happening in New York. It's the beginning. We have over 22,000 plus illegal immigrant children in New York City, that a sanctuary city. We have 800,000 children in that school district in the New York City school system at a cost of about $40,000 a child a year. Think about that. And now you have another large mass group of migration. We're seeing that it's continuing to rise. Migrants at the border right now are far exceeding what last year's numbers were. And just so this is in perspective for all of you, during the Biden administration, we have had roughly between 7.2 and 7.7 million encounters nationwide of illegal migrants. I want to put that in perspective. Not only that, the majority of people that are coming into this country are not being properly vetted. In New York City, where I was there earlier this week, and I was interviewing parents and officials about what is happening in the New York City school district as it opened up this new school year, they were talking about the major concerns that they have. Because you have people that are not also properly vetted, but they are staying in areas right around schools, in hotels. They've taken over Randall Park. You know, we're in Chicago right now. They're having to put up tent cities just to keep people indoors and safe from the cold winter. But I want you to think about this. There are a lot of migrant children that are in these groups, that are in these hotels like the Roosevelt and others, and in tent cities. And there are adults that have access to these children, and parents and guardians that cannot properly care for these children. And even when children are placed into guardianships, Health and Human Services has lost track of them by the tune of 85% of the children that have been placed into guardianships and with people that are supposedly relatives and parents. We've lost track of them in the United States. This is a disaster. It is not only a disaster for our children who will be in overcrowded classrooms, other children that are going to have to learn English and they need to catch up, and our kids are going to be, I saw all of this in California. Our kids get left behind. You know, other kids are trying to catch up. The school system just breaks. We're at the very beginning now in New York. We're going to see what happens as the year goes on. But a lot of parents are speaking out. Parents are saying, look, not only do we not want crazy critical race theory being taught in our classrooms because it's dividing our nation, we don't want these radical leftist teachers, but we also want some semblance of normalcy for our children. And we want to be able to protect not only the migrant children, but our children as well. And we shouldn't have, remember when I was in New York, and they were using the elementary schools to house men who had crossed the border? I couldn't even believe it until I saw it. I was like, what is going on here? When I went to one of the schools in Brooklyn and I'm standing there, and the gymnasium, which was only 10 feet from the school, was full of men who were walking outside smoking cigarettes and, by the way, drinking at night. The kids had to be locked in the classroom during that time. Now it's not like that. Of course, that ended because parents were irate. They were so angry, but it hasn't stopped. The Biden administration has left the border wide open, and it is still wide open. It is a Biden border policy. It is a wide open border. It is their policy, and you, my friends, are paying the price for that. I interviewed today's guest on Sean's show earlier this week on September 11th, a very solemn day, I believe, for everyone. 22 years since the World Trade Center was attacked by terrorists, by Al-Qaeda terrorists, and the Pentagon. And I was in New York City, and it just blew my mind that we have failed on all the lessons learned. That of all the sacrifices that we have made over the last 22 years, our commander-in-chief, President Biden, has left that border wide open and allowed people to just flood into this country without any background checks whatsoever. And I think not only are our school systems faced with this, but we could be faced with another attack in this nation. God help us. Far worse than what we even saw on September 11th. And think about that. That changed our lives. It created America's longest war. And it has exacerbated problems across the globe. So yes, I'm very worried and I am very concerned. And in a moment, we're going to be talking to Charles Love, a parent who is part of the New York City School District and somebody who has been fighting back against these radical policies and speaking out so that your children can be safe. But first, I want to thank Allegiance Gold. Thank you so much, Allegiance Gold, for being a partner of the Sara Carter Show. It means so much to me. And you know what else means a lot to me? It means a lot to me that you're allowing people to diversify their assets and be able to protect their assets through Allegiance Gold, because guess what? Gold and silver allow you to protect what you've worked so hard for, and they give you back the control and the privacy that you need. And because reputation is important to me, guess what? The only company I recommend is Allegiance Gold. So right now they're giving a $5,000 offer for Sara Carter listeners of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that I sent you. Just go ahead, say, hey, Sara sent me, and then they'll give you this, right, on a qualifying purchase. Allegiance Gold has the highest ratings in the industry, 5 stars with TrustLink, AAA rated with the Business Consumer Alliance, and they have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. And remember this, you're a Sara Carter listener. Right now, you'll get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that I sent you. So don't wait, call or click today. That's 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, or go to protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, folks, but we can prepare. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, S-A-R-A, no H, or protectwithsara.com. I'm so happy to have Charles Love on the Sara Carter Show. Charles, you're the executive director of Seeking Educational Excellence. It's a nonprofit committed to empowering disadvantaged students to reach their full potential. I interviewed you in New York City for Sean Hannity. I think it's brilliant, your arguments, particularly regarding the mass migration that's been coming to New York and how that's affected students in the city. You're also the co-host of Cut the Bull podcast. So let me start off first with, and you're a father, you have a child in the New York City school district. And I just want to make that clear because we brought you on the Hannity show as a dad talking about your child and what is happening inside the school system. So first, thank you so much for being a part of the show. And tell me a little bit first about being the executive director of Seeking Educational Excellence.
Well, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here and talk about these important things. So see, it's interesting because we started, I often say we were a bit, naive in a sense, but not so much at the time. So the organization started in 2018. So of course, no one knew what was going to happen in 2020. So we had a really simple model to say, people are debating politics so much, and I'm more of a cultural guy. So while they're arguing about who's right or wrong about policy, what levels of racism the country's facing, we just looked at it and said, well, Let them have that debate. But what we do know is there are things that leaders can do to motivate and to mentor. And there's things the individual can do to improve their stature and their opportunities. So what if we just focused on that? Gave kids an understanding of agency, taught them what they can control, told them to focus on that. Yeah, let them argue about how much racism is in the country if you're a young Black kid, but you can't control what the white racist thinks of you. But what you can control is how many hours you study, right? What you can control is the effort you put forth. You can control your actions and your behavior, who you hang out with, what decisions you make. So that's all we wanted to do. Reach out to people and put them in front of people that have achieved, either coming from bad, difficult backgrounds and not so much, because everyone can learn something from those experiences. And you know, one last thing is you hear a lot of comments about, you know, Charles Barkley famously said, you go into the Black neighborhoods and all the kids want to be rappers or basketball stars. You go to white schools, it's different. Well, a lot of it may be the fame and money, but a lot of it is they don't have a reference point for any other job. You're never going to have a poor inner city school kid say, when I grow up, I want to be an actuary, right? Because they don't know what that is. So that was our goal, to simply say, teach them critical thinking, teach them how to control their own fate and make better decisions, and introduce them to positive role models so we can change what we do from the inside. Of course, all that changed in 2020
Right.
because the country shifted.
Well, the country shifted, and we also saw, I think parents woke up, especially like I remember when it first started, and I bring this example up quite often in Loudon County, Virginia, where a lot of the parents, you know, all of a sudden started speaking out against, you know, teaching CRT in the classroom, or what was happening in our classrooms was now more visible because students were at home and their parents were watching their education kind of on their computer daily. And just so people out there know, I'm talking about critical race theory. And in my, how I try to describe it is that it basically reassesses the United States, and it breaks our history, and it breaks everybody down into groups with specific claims and a lot of victimization included in there. You know, as a Black man in America, you know, how did you see CRT when you first started to realize, okay, this is being taught in our classrooms? How did you view it? I mean, did you see it as a breakdown of groups and splitting groups? I felt that it did more harm than it did good. I believe in teaching the truth, absolutely. And we have a horrific history in some areas, you know, that needs to be taught. But I also saw CRT as a way of really dividing the students one from each other, or isolating them one from another.
Well, yeah, I agree. But there were two ways I looked at it. One, I try to simplify, because a lot of people, like, I have these conversations in the real world. So you can't really convince people when they don't know what's happening. Maybe their kids are older, or the kids are out of school, they don't have kids. So you ask them if something's bad, they think it's bad in theory, but they don't think it's really happening. And once things are so partisan that once they think it's their side, they will just close their eyes to anything. So I made it simple that it's not academically advantageous for the kids, and it's harmful. And I usually didn't address it as CRT because, you know, you get into this rabbit hole of defining what it is. Is it legal studies? Is it in the universities? Are they really teaching it? I made it really simple. They are teaching things that are negative for the growth of the children, regardless of what their backgrounds are. And so let me give you some examples, right? So that's the way so when I viewed it at first, I would have conversations with the teacher and the principal about a lesson plan. I'd say, how is this supposed to help the kids? So you made a great point. A lot of the arguments are, people will say, well, we have negative histories, and I want people, you got to teach it honestly. You got to teach the good and the bad. Well, that's true, but there's an age appropriateness to this that people don't think about it. So think of building a house. You're having some work done in your house. You're building a house, you start with a foundation. If the foundation is not solid, everything crumbles. So my problem with what was being done is that the foundation was being bastardized and mixed. So no, there's no problem with teaching the negative, but you wouldn't start off with America sucks, because if I start off with that, if you ever say anything positive, I'm not going to believe it, because the foundation was America's bad. So I wouldn't start off with the negative, right? You start off with the simple facts that we could all agree on, how the country was founded, where the people came from, those step by step, and you add on layers. My kid is 7 now. He was in, kindergarten or first grade? I think he was in first grade when he came home from a, listen closely, MLK lesson, Martin Luther King lesson, and asked me if he could be a slave because he has brown skin. Now, help me out. You say you want to teach honest history. Was Martin Luther King fighting slavery?
Right.
Because I don't think he was.
No.
Right? So that's the true problem. So I don't have to call it CRT and all these other things and say, we should teach Black history. No, the issue is it age appropriate? Is it academically advantageous? And is it one-sided? Are they trying to craft a narrative? They also told him on Columbus Day, his lesson for Columbus Day was Columbus Day shouldn't be a holiday. That was the lesson plan.
I know.
So he walked away not knowing anything about Columbus except he shouldn't have a holiday. How is that teaching? That's not teaching.
Well, it is teaching if you're teaching an ideology that is based, that states that the United States has systemic racism. The racism is integrated into our system. And therefore now we've got to break it all down, right? And get rid of all history and restructure it the way that we see it. And that became really dangerous for so many children and for society in general. I never saw things so divided as I've seen them in the last maybe decade. And I mean, I'm even not in my own family. I grew up in a very mixed family. You know, my mother came from Cuba in the 1950s, and my great grandmother was from West Africa. And in the 1950s, I see all these pictures of my mom with her friends. And in Cuba, of course, things were different on the island. People were very mixed, and it was never really as divided as it was in the United States during that time. But I looked at the United States now and I thought to myself, wow, our children are so divided. And we saw it in the news. We saw it, you know, with the riots with George Floyd. And how much damage do you think that has done to our country and race relations? And as a teacher and as an educator, I mean, when you're out there, and I consider you a teacher, you're a parent, you're working with your child every day, you belong to a group that focuses on these issues. What is it going to take to rebuild that? I mean, are we stuck with that mindset that we've seen? And I don't want to call it CRT either. It could be just the way we teach, our ideology. Or are we going to come out of that? Are more people going to stand up and say, no way, this is too much for a young child to take in. And there has to be good things about this country too.
Right. Well, the problem is, now you talked about how do we fix it? It's going to be a problem because it's going to take a while because it didn't happen overnight. So it's like you got to flush the line, right? So you got to clean this out. Even if you flick the switch tomorrow and change the way we talk, it still would take a while for it to run its course. But the problem I have with what's happening is, think about New York. Everybody talks about New York and Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty and bring us your poor and immigrants, right? And they talk about, you know, it's a nation of immigrants and we're the melting pot. Remember, we used to be called the melting pot, which I thought was a great analogy, right? Because you still taste all the unique flavors, but they blend together. Right. What they're doing is the reverse of that. They want a tossed salad. So they want everybody to come from wherever they come, keep their original cultural beliefs, but not make their culture a little more American, make ours a little more, you know, Egyptian. No, they want to keep them separate. So the way they teach, even in my kid, I had one of the meetings with the principal. I'm sitting in the principal's office and I'm looking at the books, and every book is about differences. So differences are good. You can learn from them, but I look at them as kind of like interesting cocktail conversation. Oh, your mom was from Cuba? What's that like? Right. That's cool. It makes you and your mom interesting, but it doesn't change how American you are. But what they're teaching is, let's first break everybody apart like a deconstructed salad, and let's teach, you know, Cuban history and Black history and all this stuff. So now the foundation is set that I need to think of people as Cuban and Jewish and Black and women and gay first, and then do everything else. And somehow they think, because I know some of it is ideological, political, whatever, but some of them just truly believe they're helping. And they think, if we highlight the differences so people can understand them, then we can teach kids to be one and to be together. But you can't, because you've already set in their mind, and you're doing it at a young age, that differences are more important than our similarities. And if that's more important, then why would I look at you as a fellow American? I look at you as a woman. Sarah's a woman first. Like, this is a woman. You have woman issues. You think of America like a woman, and there's an American way to think, a woman way to think about it. There's a Cuban way, and that's your way. And that's what they're teaching them. So until they teach them that regardless of whether you're an atheist or a Muslim or Christian or whatever the case may be, you're still an American, and all of this is your history. Like, they talk about teaching Black history. What is that? If you're teaching American history, that's American history. Unless you're teaching, West African history from 1742, but that's separate. That's world history. American history, it should be taught, but it shouldn't be taught as an outhouse, separate type of history.
Absolutely. Thank you. I remember, and you brought up a memory for me. I remember every time somebody would ask my mom, like, oh, where are you from? She would say, I'm an American. I'm an American.
You can ask that
I'm
now.
an American. Like, she was just like, that's who I am. I mean, I came from Cuba, but I left that all behind. When I came here to be an American, and that's who I am. And you're right. It's always putting that first. It's that melting pot that I think makes us so unique and beautiful and special in the world. And it makes me sad to see that going away. Now I'm going to bring you fast forward to what is happening in New York right now. Well, you got over 800,000 students in the New York City school system, thereabouts.
Down from 1 million. So let's not ignore the fact that many of them fled. But go on. That's
right. That's right. A lot of people left New York. COVID did that. Or maybe Biden did that. I don't know. I'm watching COVID did that. Biden did that. I'm not sure. But now you've got a flood of illegal migrants coming in. Estimated over 22,000 illegal migrant children who are in the school system or who are trying to go into the school system. And your resources are already stripped thin. You got 10,000 people a month coming into the city on average. Let's talk about that. How is that affecting the school district? I mean, it's got to be an enormous strain.
It's an enormous strain on the city writ large. The schools, the parks, because all the parks have 10 cities, but the parks, housing, crime, everything. Let's start, because I got to get as much in. So let's start with the two most important things. I'll come back to schools. But I just read an article today, because Eric Adams, whatever you agree or disagree with Eric Adams, he's clearly not some crazy right-winger. They don't like what he says, so they start labeling him MAGA. And saying that he's wrong and he's throwing immigrants under the bus. So I just read an article today saying that bondholders say he's wrong about the shift that the city's gonna face from an economic standpoint due to the migrants. Well, that seems a little disingenuous in the sense that even if they're right, so as of today, it's not putting a strain on the city. They're acting as if, maybe they think we're not that right. They're acting as if 10,000 people aren't coming every month. Right? 10,000 people are still coming every month. So because it's not a case now doesn't mean it won't be a case later. That's one thing. And then I think it is a case now. I think it is a case now. Look at Randall. Look at Randall Park. I mean, they've had to take over, and you've got children that can't go out on the soccer fields because part of their park is being taken over by tent cities. You've got winter coming around the corner. You have people at the Roosevelt Hotel who are out in the front of the streets, and now they've got little tags. I was down there with their QR code to go in and out of the hotel, and you've got children inside this mass hotel in the middle of the city who are with men that haven't even been properly vetted. And it's like, where do you put all the people? Where do you put them? So that's another thing. So right below the article, it's funny you mentioned that. Perfect segue. Right below the article about, you got plenty of money. You got $8 billion in reserve, but he's going to spend $5 billion every year over 3 years. And that's if nobody else comes. But we don't do math here in New York. But beyond that, there's right below that article was an article about the housing shortage, right? And how there's not enough apartments for people to rent currently for the people who are here. So if you bring more people in, where are you going to put them? We have a law in New York City. I wasn't living there at the time. When I first heard about it, it was interesting. A law saying that you can't, they have a right to shelter. So you can't put people in shelter. You have to find places for them to stay. And Eric Adams is saying, because there's so many people, women and children, we're running out of places. We have to put them in shelters. So that becomes an argument. So if there's more and more people coming, what are you going to do? And briefly to the schools, if you generally have learning loss over the summer, and then the kids are still catching up from COVID, and then you put people in the class that have different needs, of course it's going to be a strain. They're asking for resources from the state and from the feds to help. Maybe they get them, maybe they don't. But even if they get them, and refunding is not an issue, there's a finite amount of time in the school day. So if your kid is in the school and he's one of the kids struggling to get to grade level, or he's one of the advanced kids and he wants, calculus. I see Caltech is saying that you don't have to take calculus because all schools don't offer calculus. You're going to have fewer schools in New York offering calculus because they can't afford to do that because they're spending it on something else. And those kids who need the extra help, they deserve it, right? You're in the class, you got a kid that's struggling, you have to help them. What are other kids doing? Twiddling the thumbs?
And that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what happens, Charles. You and I both know that as parents. We both know that. All the parents all of you who are listening to this, you know that. And it's sad because I remember when my daughter Sophia first went to a public school in California, she went into kindergarten. And I think I told you this story when I was in New York, but I remember asking her kindergarten teacher, like, okay, what do we need to do to get her ahead of the game? Like, is there anything I need to do as a parent? I was very excited. Even with my son, Alex, I was the exact same way. But I remember this particular story because Sophia's teacher, kindergarten teacher, looked at me and said, do you see my classroom? Because I speak Spanish. She goes, like 80% of this class right now is almost Spanish speaking only. Sophia is one of the few kids that speaks only, English. So does she read? I said, yes, Sophia is already reading. Does she know her ABCs? Yes, she does. Does she count to 10? Yes, she does. And guess what? She goes, your kid just passed kindergarten.
Don't fit in the corner. It's the first grade.
I was like, what? I'm like, you did not just say that to me. And she said, yes, I did. She goes, look at my classroom, Sarah. I don't have time. I have to have a teacher's aide and we have to get these kids up to speed to pass the tests. So that is the reality.
You're never going to get that time back.
You're never going to get that time back. And I didn't have the money.
And that also goes back
I didn't have the money to put her in private school. So I was like, okay.
What could you do? Right. And that's part of the argument where they're saying, what I get upset when I watch these people in Florida debating what level of Black history you're going to teach. I'm like, you're missing the point. It's the wrong argument. That teacher's not going to take that curriculum and toss it aside. They're like, okay, so I'm in third grade, let's say. What percentage of my kids are reading at first and second grade level? 2/3 go up, or maybe half go up. And they say, okay, so now I got to focus on getting them up to level with the other kids. And then you look at the other half, how do I get them to learn what they're supposed to learn while I'm also helping those kids in this finite amount of time? That's all they're doing. They don't have to, it's not about matter whether they believe it or not or how much they care about Black history. They don't have time. The kids are behind and they're trying to get them to catch up. So they're not spending their time. It was a moot argument because no teacher's going to spend their time on that when half their kids are below grade level.
Right. Absolutely. And let's go back because Mayor Eric Adams, now they're trying to go after him because he's saying we just can't handle this. Governor Kathy Hochul, she went to the White House and basically was snubbed by President Biden. And he did not talk to her about the issue, which she wanted to talk about, which was, of course, the mass migration of illegal people to New York. But this is where I take my contention with them. I think instead of just blaming, and look, I get it's political. If he wants to, make a statement about Governor Greg Abbott, go right ahead. But I think Abbott is up over his head with what is going on here in Texas. And he's trying to do everything to stop the migration as best he can, even when the federal government is not. And instead of the Democrats turning around and saying, hey, look, guess what? You're our president, Biden, but we're not going to put up with this anymore. You got to stop this because our states cannot afford it. I think that would be huge for the Democratic Party because I don't think, you know what I mean? I don't think Democrats, all of you out there, maybe the two of you who are listening to my podcast who are Democrats, who maybe there might be 4 or 6, because I try to keep the balance, but all of you out there, the parents, every one of you knows that it's real, that it is a real issue. It is fundamentally one of the top issues that Americans will be voting on in 2024. And it's obvious. I mean, you can't hide it. So why not point the finger where the finger needs to be pointed? And that's the White House.
You're 100% right. I think, and not even politically, I think the problem is everyone, think about it, take politics out. Most people, we're all a bit selfish. We're always trying to protect ourselves, think about my needs first. So the problem is everyone's trying to fix their problem. Even Abbott. Abbott's like, I got a problem. I'm screaming to the feds, help me. He's not helping. Right. All right, I'm going to send them to these cities you call sanctuaries. And then they're like, fine, we're sanctuary cities. Bring them in. We'll hug them. Then they're like, whoa, this is hard. And now Eric Adams like, send them upstate. So you're just passing on the problem. But what none of them, except for Abbott, but none of them are saying what Kathy Hochul's not saying when she goes to the White House. She's not saying stop the influx. So you can't solve the problem internally. All you're doing is redistributing the problem.
Right.
Let's send them to Idaho. Let's send them to Sacramento. No, let's stop them from coming in. Right. That's the number one. If you put it in a priority list order, what do you do first? The first thing you do is don't let anybody else in. Then you turn and say, what do we do with what we have? But you can't say, what do we do with it? I'll turn and say, what are we going to do with these 100,000 people in New York while 10,000 are coming every day at the border? You have to stop that first. And not very few Democrats are talking about stopping that. They're talking about what's the best way to handle what's happening. But no one's saying put a plug in the influx. And that's the first step. And until you do that, I don't know what's going to happen.
I mean, look, nationwide right now, since the Biden administration has taken office, we have approximately, and these are the latest numbers. I was just in a meeting earlier this morning with experts, Mark Morgan, former head of ICE, Tom Homan, Mark Morgan with DHS, Tom Homan with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, all the top guys, Rodney Scott, former head of Border Patrol. And we were having this meeting and it was about 7.2 to 7.7 million encounters in the United States nationwide since Biden took office. Let's just say 7.7 million, between 7.2 and 7.7. That doesn't even include all the gotaways. Those are the people that have come in who have disappeared into the fabric of our system. And that's looking at around 1.6 right now, 1.7 million. That is an enormous amount of people. That's bigger than some states, than combined states. I mean, and you're right. You made a perfect point, Charles. You called it redistribution. You can't redistribute people. It doesn't matter, right, because it's all the same cookie jar. It might be different parts of that cookie jar in the state, in whichever state it's going to, but it's all a part of that same cookie jar. And our children are being affected. And when you look at New York, and one of the big issues that I had, and we were talking about that with Mr. Chen as well, who was with us, another parent who was very vocal about this, but the concern, too, is the safety of our children. A lot of the people are not properly vetted. I was talking to you on September 11th, which is a pretty solemn day. I mean, it's 22 years since New York was attacked by terror and by Al-Qaeda, and also, the Pentagon. But it's been 22 years, but our lives have changed for 22 years, the trajectory of everything. And now the border's wide open. Are you concerned at all as well about the safety when people aren't properly vetted? And like you said, they're staying in hotels right around the school districts. And we just don't know who's here.
Obviously, I mean, it's definitely a concern for a city that's always a constant target at some level. That's the reason why they have police forces in New York, divisions specifically, try to root out terrorism and get ahead of that. But some of this stuff, I try to simplify the stuff. Some of the stuff is just really obvious. I think I told you when we spoke on Monday that we keep being told that people are coming here from distressed countries in Latin America, mostly Central America. They opened up the processing center in Midtown Manhattan, and we watched here local news. We watched people line up around the building, sleeping outside because there were no places, or trying to get processed. And we saw people who clearly weren't from Latin America. Right. Clearly. I mean, I hate to judge, but you can look at them and tell they weren't. So if you don't know who they are, here's another thing. So a second, even though it's a roundabout way to get to that same information. So we're talking security, but obviously hitting home the fact that we don't know who they are. Eric Adams is trying to get work visas for these people so the people can work. And Kathy Hochul was trying this stuff too. And Kathy Hochul said the problem, listen to what she said, that the focus was on giving them access to work. But she said the problem is there's a process you have to do, stuff, paperwork you have to fill out in order to get the status, the work status. And we can't find the people and we don't know who they are. So how can we? So if you don't know who they are, you can't find them to give them an opportunity to work, especially people who are coming here for greater economic opportunity. If you can't find them for that, obviously anybody who's here for, negative and dangerous and criminal reasons, you're not going to be able to find them either. Not to mention that though a judge threw it out. Side note, bringing it back around to political though, New York City tried to allow people who were here illegally to vote, right?
Right.
It got struck down by a judge, but the whole point was you had to be here for 30 days and you had to have work status. So if they give all these people work status, the next time they try that, they would be eligible. And that's your political piece.
That's it. And that really does answer the big question, right? Which is why are they keeping the border wide open? Because they... Right. And I mean, people can come after us and say, oh, well, you don't know that for sure. Well, then why? There's a
there's no logical reason.
There's no logical reason. There's either a financial incentive, which is money being donated to all these NGOs, and we know they're pocketing millions of dollars. Right. We know FEMA took $770 million plus over this last year just for migrants alone. FEMA and then distributes that money to NGOs. We know the same thing's happening with DHS. They're asking for $600 million to take care of migrants. Everybody's pocketing money. But what's the most important thing? The vote and right. Bringing in. But it's also assuming that all of these people that are coming in want to be a Democrat, right? And that's so racist. And that's just such a horrible statement because we know that's what they're thinking.
Right. But that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think I'm in the minority, even amongst conservative people. But I say that, you think that, but I think that's really naive and short-sighted to think that people, first of all, you're thinking that people who are Latin American are more likely to be, but they're not all Latin American. We already proved that. But beyond that, think about it. If I'm coming here from countries that are largely Catholic, and I'm coming here because I want economic opportunity, what makes you think once I get to the next generation and I found this taste of this American dream and I know how bad it was, that I'm going to want anything that's going to guide the country back to where I came from. So obviously Cubans famously tend not to be
correct.
Falling into the socialist strike. A lot of Chinese immigrants don't fall into the socialist strike. So there are groups of people that are generally not so liberal, but the people who come from areas that tend to change the more successful they get. So I think it's naive, but beyond politically, I think it's naive to think they're all going to come here and just.
Oh, it is naive. It is naive. And we're seeing that now with the shift, not only in we're looking at different demographics, right? Well, we've seen in the Hispanic community now a shift moving more towards either independent voting or conservatism. We've also seen that in the Black community. There's been a shift because people are people. They want to feed their families. They want to educate their children. It doesn't matter. They want safety number one.
You're telling me that if I have a family member who's physically attacked and you're letting the guy out of jail, I'm going to remember who you are.
That's right. It doesn't matter what color that person is. It doesn't matter where they came from. Right. What you want is your family to be safe. Like when I was in Oakland and I was talking to one of the NAACP leaders there, they said, look, we want our community to be safe. We need to call for a state of emergency. We don't want this low bail, no bail junk. We need to protect our children and our community. Color should not come into play here. And I think this is what's so important. And I think, Charles, I want to talk to you for like 3 or 4 hours, but I'm going to bring you back on because I think it's important that we keep talking about this. And I think it's important that for everyone, your listeners, my listeners, for people out there to understand that we all can find common ground. We started this with talking about CRT. I'm done. I'm done with these, ideologies that divide us. We're Americans. We should want to do what's best for all of us and for all our communities. New York is an awesome city. Somebody wrote me and said, oh, you were excited to be in New York. Why? And I'm like, because I love that city. I do. And I know it's a tough place. It can be a tough place, and a lot of our cities are, but I love the beautiful richness of all of our cities and what they have to offer. But I don't think we can resolve any of these issues if we don't sit down at the same table, talk about it, find common ground, and hold the people who are turning our cities into insane asylums accountable. I mean, there's just no other way.
Yeah, and they also have to stop lying about it, as I mentioned before. The problem is you can have the conversation, but how can you have the conversation if they're lying about it? If they're, the moment Eric Adams says, this is a problem, they say, no, it's not. The moment you say, crime is bad on the subway, it's like, I went to work today and nobody punched me, so it must be fine. Right? It's like they're lying about stuff. I mean, just be honest. They're good that you may have made it home safely, but there is an issue with people attacking people. Just be honest. Nobody's saying that you got to throw the whole thing out, but you have to be honest about what's happening.
You're right. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. But the thing is that the reason they're gaslighting, and I like that word, even though it's overused, the reason they're doing that is because they don't want to shut down that border. And I think the only way to stop the spread of the lie, of the virus of lying, right, is to inject truth all the time into it, for people to just stand up and speak the truth. And don't worry, look, Charles Love is speaking the truth. I'm speaking the truth. We're going to stand up. And you know what? We might get some backlash. Mayor Adams spoke the truth. He finally stood up and did that. He's getting backlash. But guess what? In the end, the truth always wins because it's obvious and people see it. Thank you so much, Charles, for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. You're awesome. I can't wait for you to come back. And when can I get on your show? I'm very excited. Yeah. I'm very, very excited to be on Cut the Bull podcast. I love that. By the way,
let's make it happen.
Let's do it. Cut the Bull podcast, folks. Right. Go out there and listen to it. Listen to Charles Love. He speaks common sense and truth. And I look forward to being on your show. I want to thank you, Charles Love, for joining the show today. It means a lot to me. It's great to have a voice of reason, and somebody who is, you know, these are like our heroes. These are our silent heroes out there, folks. You are fighting the good fight every single day. Look, Charles Love is out there in New York City, and boy, is he fighting the good fight and standing up to these radical liberal ideas that are destroying our school systems and our schools. And he's doing it not only to save his child, but to save yours. And I know there are so many more of you out there. There are so many more people out there fighting the good fight. If you're listening to me and you want to be a part of this show, please send me an email. Go ahead and send me that email. We'll vet these emails, but you can send it to saracarterofficial@gmail.com. That is saracarterofficial@gmail.com. If you love today's show and you want even more of the Sara Carter Show, make sure you rate this podcast 5 stars and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. I don't care if it's Apple, Spotify, whatever you listen to, just do it. It is so good for me. It's so good for you. And we can keep bringing you the guests that literally change lives, right? Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, on X at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. God bless all of our children. And God bless the great state of Texas.